I've been running a business here in Dubai for the past year, and in this video, I want to give you all of the boring day-to-day details that you need to know if you want to start or run a business here, because there are many things that you might not consider that you absolutely need to be aware of. So running a business here in the UAE is overall extremely simple and straightforward because they want to attract builders, business people to this country to build a country and the economy and things like this. What's also really great is that for most of you, you can get 0% corporate tax completely legally. Yes, there is the 9% tax, but that only applies in certain cases. For most people, you don't actually have to pay that. So in this video, I'm also going to cover everything you need to know about that and how to qualify for 0% tax, etc. But with all of that said, there are certain things that you absolutely need to know and that you won't necessarily be told by anyone unless you find these things out yourself. And I don't want you to get fined, so that is why I'm making this video. This is going to be an extremely boring video. We're going to talk about banking, we're going to talk about taxes, we're going to talk about hiring, annual registration, and all these kinds of things. Or who knows, if you're a business nerd just like me, maybe this is going to be the most exciting video you've ever seen. And just a note that I run an online business, specifically a coding YouTube channel. No, not this YouTube channel, although this is also a business now. So the closer your business is related to that, the more relevant this is going to be for you. If you have a boots on the ground business, so more of a real business, then most of this will also be fully relevant for you, but there might be certain additional things that you want to consider. And if that is the case, then I recommend you book a call with my business setup experts down below who can walk you through the specifics for your situation. So first things first, let's talk about getting set up. Now, I made a whole separate video about setting up your business here in Dubai. I'll leave that video down below in the description, but just the high level. The first thing you'll need to consider is whether you want a free zone or a mainland company. Just to oversimplify, if you have an online business where you're doing business abroad, then you'll probably want to do a free zone company. If you're doing business locally in the UAE, then you'll probably need a mainland company. Now, to set up your business, you're either going to deal directly with the government or the free zone, or you can use an agent to do everything like this for you. Now, the one thing that I want to warn you about is that for some reason, this whole business setup industry here in Dubai is full of absolute, like, either scammers or people who just have no idea what they're talking about. There's all these agencies who will promise like, oh, get set up in Dubai for $1,000, which is not even possible because the government fees alone are going to be more than that. They might just list out like some portion of the fee, but there's going to be hidden fees on top of that. So if you're seeing something like, oh, get set up for $4,000, be very, very skeptical, because it should not even be possible for it to be that cheap unless it's in a very weird free zone somewhere. You want to deal with someone who understands your business, what you're doing, and who has experience dealing with many different kinds of businesses. If you are interested, I can hook you up with my business partners who are experts in this business setup space. What they offer is a Western perspective onto getting set up in Dubai. They have themselves run many different online businesses and things like this. They fully understand all of this. With them, you deal with my guys directly rather than some 9-to-5 employee who doesn't really understand the law and who doesn't care enough to properly check for the right advice, etc. when you ask for them. So if you want, you can get a free consultation with them down below in the description, where they will walk you through the entire process, everything that you need to know. Now, obviously, you don't have to use them, but whatever you do, make sure you do your due diligence on whichever agency you're using and be very, very careful. Now, let's talk about banking. The first thing you will need to consider is how are you going to get a bank account. Now, for most people, especially online businesses, you're going to want to open something called Weo. So Weo is this new online bank that's very much like, if you know, Monzo or Revolut in the UK or something like that, and very easy to set up as well. For many online businesses, you're not going to need to have a physical address. Like, I don't have a physical address for my business. It's just like a virtual address. For many like boots on the ground banks, you would need a real address. For Weo, you don't need it. It's just basically this online app that you use. For most people, this is going to be fine. You'll just need to have your trade license, your Emirates ID for your personally and things like this. If you do need local banking, again, if you're using My People, they can help you do that. But now this is also going to depend on the type of business you have. You're going to need to have what's called substance, so like actual real substance within the UAE. A bit more of a lengthy process. Whether you need that or not really depends on you. For most of you, Weo is going to be fine, at least for the start. Weo is all that I use personally. And also you want to be careful about, if you have a very risky license activity. So for your trade license, when you're setting up your business, you're going to need to set up your business activities. Like certain activities are going to be classed as high risk. If you have anything like that, then it's going to be much more difficult to get banking. And again, if you're setting up in some weird free zone somewhere, I've heard many cases where people are having issues with getting banking at all. So they're going to have to go and set up one company, figure out that they can't get banking for it, and then use another guy, like my guys, for example, to then set up everything properly so that they can get banking, and it can be a whole mess. So yet another reason to be careful about doing everything properly in the setup process. But for most people, WeOwe business is going to be plenty and very, very easy to open up. Now, what about the corporate tax? So up until last year, there was 0% blanket corporate tax for everyone, period. From this year onwards, so from 2024, they have introduced a headline 9% tax. Now, it's a headline 9% tax. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that everyone has to pay. They have something called a small business relief. So basically, if you make less than 3 million dirhams revenue, so not profit, but revenue, then when you do your annual filings, which we'll talk about in a moment how to do that, you're going to be able to claim this small business relief, which makes all of your profit exempt from corporate tax. If you make more than 3 million dirhams a year, then you are going to be liable for the 9% corporate tax. And also, even if you have to pay the 9% tax, the first 375,000 dirhams will be taxed at 0%, and the 9% will only be on any income above, so any profit above 375,000 dirhams. That is if your total revenue is above 3 million dirhams. In the other case, you pay 0 on everything. However, number one, you're going to be able to deduct a salary for yourself. And now, what is a salary that you're going to be able to deduct for yourself is going to depend. It's going to be essentially what is a market rate salary for the type of work you do. And what that means is anybody's guess. Right now, here in the UAE corporate tax law, this is the official corporate tax law, and right here it says related parties must apply the arm's length principle when entering into a transaction or an arrangement with each other. This means that the price of the transaction between related parties should be the same as if the transaction had taken place between two unrelated parties. Now, this is a bit of legal speak, but basically what this means, related parties refer to, in this case, like an owner of a company and the company are, for example, related parties. And what this just says here is that any transaction between them, so for example, anything you pay to yourself, has to be the same amount as if the transaction had taken place between unrelated independent parties, so as if you paid it to someone else. There's no more official information about this rather than that it has to be like market rate, so what's called an arm's length principle. That is how much you're going to be able to deduct as a salary, which is not going to be taxable just like in any other country. And obviously, because we still have a 0% personal income tax period for everything, so that means that all of that money is going to be completely tax-free, and you're only going to be taxed on the profits above that salary, plus obviously above all the other expenses that you also have. So even though the threshold when the 9% corporate tax is going to apply depends on revenue, you're obviously going to be taxed on profit, not revenue. Now, very important. Whether or not you are liable for the 9% tax or not, you're going to have to register your company for corporate tax. And yes, you're going to have to do this whether you have a free zone company or a mainland company. There's still misinformation out there that tells you that, oh, if you have a free zone company, then 9% corporate tax doesn't apply. It applies whether you are a free zone or a mainland company, unless you do something called qualifying activities. Now, most of you won't qualify for this. There's going to be a list of, I think there's like banking or like some mining activities or something like that, where if your business is in these couple of categories, then you are going to be exempt from corporate tax. But for most people, that is not going to apply. Whether you're a free zone company or a mainland company, you're going to be liable for the tax based on those criteria that I just described. And you're going to have to register whether or not you are above that threshold or not. The way you do that is you go to this website called Emara Tax. I'm going to leave the link down below. You just register your company. It's a bit of an annoying process to do. The website isn't very good, but you just fill out a couple of forms and your company is going to be registered. Then at the end of the year, specifically 9 months after the end of the tax year, so for example, for the tax year of 2024, by September of 2025, you're going to have to file your taxes. And that is also where you're going to claim this small business relief. Now, again, you have to do this whether or not you're actually going to have to pay the tax. You're going to have to file them. Very important to know. The other tax that you need to deal with, that, for example, when I was doing this process myself with the free zone directly, they never told me about, was VAT. Now, similarly, there are certain thresholds for when you have to register for VAT. So that's value added tax, which is levied at 5%. Now, and we can look at this on the official website of the Ministry of Finance of the UAE. We can see down here, the registering for VAT. A business must register for VAT if their taxable supplies and import exceed the mandatory registration threshold of 375,000 AED. So once you have any sales that you have done while operating the business from the UAE, above this threshold, you're going to have to register for VAT. However, there's going to be certain sales that are going to be zero rated, meaning you won't actually have to charge VAT. This gets a bit complicated, but just bear with me. And down here we can see zero rated sectors. For example, exports of goods and services outside of the GCC. So GCC refers to the Gulf Cooperation Council. So that's basically the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, these countries. Any things that you sell outside of these countries, you won't actually have to levy the 5% tax. They're going to be zero rated. But nevertheless, even if you make only these zero rated supplies, once you go over the threshold of 375,000, you're going to have to register. So again, on one hand is the criteria where you have to register, and on the other hand is the criteria where you have to actually charge the tax. And you can read the list of these other zero rated sectors right here on the website, which is also going to be linked down below. The registration is going to happen at the same website. Once you have registered for corporate tax, you're going to have the profile for your company at this Emara tax website. And in the same place, you're going to be able to register for VAT. And if you don't do this in time, there's going to be a fine of either, I think it's 20,000 or 10,000. They might have lowered it. But regardless, for both of these, if you're late, you are going to be fined. So don't be late. Now, what about if you have a foreign business? So if you live in the UAE, but you run a business that is registered somewhere else than the UAE. So very commonly, people might come here on a golden visa, for example, and they run something like a US LLC. I own a US LLC myself, but that's a whole another topic. And as you may or may not know, is if you run a US LLC that is run from outside of the US by a non-US person, then that US LLC is not going to be liable for taxes in the US. So does that mean you just don't have to pay the 9% corporate tax in the UAE either? No. If you have any business registered anywhere in the world that you run, so manage and control from the UAE, you're going to be liable for corporate taxes just the same as a UAE registered company. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about this offshore global tax space. And because there's still going to be people who question this, you can read this in the law, which will always be your only source of truth. We can see the taxable persons. In broad terms, corporate tax applies to judicial persons. So judicial person is a legal term that usually just means company or corporation, like it says here, that are incorporated in the UAE. So any company incorporated in the UAE, or foreign judicial persons, aka companies formed outside of the UAE that are effectively managed and controlled in the UAE. And you can read the definitions over here. So basically, if you run the company from the UAE, it's going to be liable for corporate tax regardless of where it is registered. Very important. Your company is in general, and there's exceptions, but in general, liable for taxes wherever it operates. So wherever that company is resident, so essentially where that company lives. So if you have something like me, with a YouTube channel where I am the main operator of the business is basically going to be based wherever I am. This is very simple. You're going to have to register for all of these things just the same, and there's going to be a way for you to register an international company. And so what about the other way around? There's many people who think that they can just set up a company in the UAE, and let's say you're below the threshold where you're getting 0% corporate tax. So many people think you can just do that and keep living in the UK or France, in a high tax country, and because there's no tax in the UAE, you're not taxed anywhere. Again, it doesn't work that way. All of these governments have figured out this loophole. They will tax any company that is resident, aka that operates from their country. If this wasn't the case, then everyone would just set up their company in like the Cayman Islands or wherever, and no one would ever pay any corporate tax. It doesn't work that way. But in this case, your UAE registered company is also technically going to be liable for UAE corporate tax, which might get you into double tax situations where you're taxable in the UAE and wherever you live. Now, usually there's going to be a double tax treaty between your country and the UAE. That's basically going to have a tiebreaker rule that, okay, wherever the company actually genuinely operates is the only place where you're going to be liable for taxes. But if you don't live in the UAE, the question is, why would you have a company in the UAE? It's really just going to complicate the situation. But definitely you can't just come and register a company here and think you're not actually liable for taxes. Now, getting back to paying yourself. So we figured out before that what you can deduct in taxes is going to depend on what is a reasonable salary, like a market rate salary to pay to yourself. But that doesn't mean that you can't pay yourself stuff. This is just about what you're able to deduct in taxes. So for example, me, I just pay myself all the profits from the company. I just literally transfer from the company account to my personal account because there's no personal tax, anything like that. I don't need to worry about these kind of things. And then at the end of the year, if the government says like, okay, actually, you're not supposed to deduct all of the salary, then the rest of it will just be classed as dividends, I suppose. So it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to pay yourself. What this is about is just what you're allowed to deduct in taxes. But again, this is only going to be relevant to you if you are above that 3 million dirham a year revenue threshold. So what about the cost? So we have 0 or 9% corporate tax. Either way, very low taxes, but there are going to be some costs involved with actually running and renewing your business license. In many countries like the UK, this is going to be extremely cheap, like 20 pounds or something like that. Here it is quite a bit more expensive than that. I can find you the exact cost that I paid. I paid a total of 34,830 AED for 2 years. So I renewed it for 2 years at once. I believe there was like a 15% discount on the license fee. So the rate would be roughly 15,000 dirhams per year or slightly more than that to renew. So that equates to whatever, $3,000-4,000 or something like that. Now, whether that is a lot to you or not will depend on your income level. Obviously, if you're not making a lot of money and this is a lot of money to you, then it might very well be the case that it's not worth it for you to set up a business in Dubai. There's many places where you can do this much more cheaply, where if you're at the level where this is a big chunk of money for you, then whatever taxes you're paying won't really matter. And the tax savings that you could get in Dubai don't matter at all because you're not really making any money. Other costs, now, if you have an accountant, things like this, again, everything is going to depend. If you work with my guys, they can give you all the contacts. They can give you the accountant that they use. And they, by the way, will not charge any additional fee for the renewal. Like, it will just be the actual license fee that it costs, like, to pay the government to renew your business. So that is that. And I wanted to briefly touch on hiring. Now, I don't have any full-time employees. My whole thing is like, I want to have a very lean business. I don't like the idea of having employees. Maybe one day I will. So I haven't done this myself, so I cannot speak from personal experience. But I did speak to someone who has hired. And what they basically said is that number one, the local market here is pretty big. Like, there's a lot of people coming in here, a lot of skilled people. So it's very cost effective because there's a lot of talent available. Now, if again, whether there is talent available for your industry is obviously going to depend. I can't necessarily tell you all of that in this video. But in general, what you need to consider is that you need to have a license for your business that has enough slots. So essentially every business license is going to have a certain number of like visa slots that you're allowed to have under your company. So for most people, you're going to set a company with one visa that's going to be for yourself. So if you want to hire, you're going to need to upgrade that license to have an additional slot for another employee, assuming you want to have them working here locally. And then you're going to have to pay for the employment visa of your employee, which is going to be a similar cost as you would have paid for yourself when you gave yourself a visa via your own company. And you're going to have to get them health insurance. And I believe you're going to have to give them benefits like a flight into the country and a flight out of the country. It's funny, I had to give that as a benefit to myself, even though it's my own company. I heard that skilled employees are gonna be costing around 6,000 to 20,000 dirhams a month. And obviously it's gonna depend on like what type of employee you're hiring, industry, etc. But those are just a few things to understand about that. And I think that brings us to the end of the video. There might be some things I missed, so if there's something else you want to know, just comment down below and I'm going to be replying to all the comments. And if there's enough things that you want to hear from me, that you want to understand about living here, running a business here, I might make a part 2 or a Q&A or something like that. So just let me know what you need to do. Again, if you haven't yet set up your business and you want to understand everything you need to know about that process, you can watch this video right here. I aimed to make it like the most comprehensive video on YouTube about that. And many of you have agreed with that. So go watch that video next. With that, I'll see you in the next one.